Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, with it now being a good day and a half since the announcement trailer dropped for the brand new entry to the Monster Hunter series, Monster Hunter Wilds, and with it all but confirmed that this is the 6th generation of Monster Hunter, with the number 6 even visibly highlighted in the shape of the logo for the game itself, this is going to be an absolutely massive jump for the series, a leap, a bound into the future, opening up our minds to a greater vision of what Monster Hunter is even capable of being. When it comes to Monster Hunter, though, the thing most players love above all else is the creature designs, the actual monsters themselves, and we actually got to see a fair few of them in this little 1-minute trailer, so I thought today it would be nice to focus in specifically on these, talk a bit about the ones that we can see, what they seem to be, what role they seem to have, any sort of predictions that we can make off of what we see of them, and then of course with the environment and the aesthetic of everything, I want to also talk about a couple of predictions for monsters that I could see returning in this setting from what we've been shown so far. First then, let's talk about the monsters that we actually see. The first creature in this sort of thing is the sort of little pangolin lightning rod species of guys that we just see a bit about how they work from this, which is really neat. The smaller ones appear to be the female of the species. They have more rounded, curved backs, and you can see that they are covered in these little birds just hanging out on top of them. These seem to be an endemic life species similar to World and Iceborne, and yes, it is silly to see them just sitting around in the backs of these creatures getting a free ride, but from what we learn in the trailer, it's actually really ecologically quite smart, and it's just one of those things that really makes me love this series the way that I do, because as silly as all is, as silly as it looks sometimes, they always find a way to make it at least make enough sense to just suspend your disbelief. So here we have the female of the pangolin species, smaller, rounder, a lot of birds on top of them. The males also have a bird or two of them on their head, and their defining feature is a giant spike coming out of their back. The environment itself, at least in this section of the trailer, is shown to be a sort of desert type land that has frequent, massive lightning storms. This is part of the reason that there are spires in the desert itself that seem to attract lightning too. There are questions about whether those spires are man-made, perhaps even maybe by an ancient civilization, but the spikes on the back of the male pangolin seem to have a similar effect to these, in that they attract lightning that would otherwise be hitting nearby them. That suddenly gives this herbivore species an entire backstory, really. This grouping is a whole load of females with only a couple of males. We also see a much larger herd later on in the trailer that's the exact same story. A hell of a lot of females, only a couple of males. They stick very closely together, traveling in packs, and while they seem non-aggressive, they definitely are defensive of each other. In a world where these lightning storms are frequent, the random strikes of lightning become a threat, a known threat to all the creatures. And so we see one of the larger male pangolins actually tank a lightning bolt because of the lightning rod on its back, and I believe that is an entirely purposeful part of their biology that evolved over time in this desert because of these storms. The spike exists as a sort of lightning rod, the males being resistant enough to actually ground this energy back into the floor, the females always staying near them so that any stray lightning bolts are drawn directly towards the lightning rods on the backs of the males instead of hitting the females. It keeps them safe from a bolt of lightning just coming down directly on them and hurting them, as they instead know that it will always aim for the lightning rod type structure as long as it is near them. The birds then stick around these creatures for the same reason. Birds are in a dangerous position generally, especially when they know for a fact that a storm is rising. Lightning and birds, not a good mix, especially because they tend to fly high up, and lightning tends to be a bit more volatile the higher up you go. And so my guess is that these birds are actually freeloading a little bit here, riding around on the pangolins on the parts that they know are safe because they know that it's the male's lightning rods that actually draw the lightning. Notice how the majority of these birds are riding the females here, and the males just have one maybe on their head, nothing anywhere close to the lightning rod on the back at all. This implies the birds are well aware of the functions of the species and choose to hang out with them actively, in my opinion likely for safety once again from these storms. It's possible this is even a sort of symbiotic relationship in some way. Maybe the birds are cleaning their shells while they are there or something like that. It's possible, but I see no direct indication of that. Either way, the fact that we can see so much about this pangolin type species from their small role just in this trailer is awesome to me. I love Monster Hunter, and I love when the ecology of something is so visibly recognizable before we are even actually told what it is in any words at all. The other thing that I want to talk about with the monsters we see is their sort of relatives, so to say. These are clearly small monsters. I'd say the closest looking other small monsters in the entire series that we've had before are actually the gown goats that we had in Sunbreak in actual shape, which is quite interesting to me. And so perhaps that means that gown goats will also be back somewhere around the world, given that they have these same actual skeletons, so it'd be quite easy for the devs to include them too. Then we flash over to another new species of bipedal scaly boys. These look a lot like Kestodon or Gastodon from previous games, but with enough notable differences in their color, in their shape, in the way that their fur looks, that they are clearly their own new species, a variation of that style of creature. We don't get to see anywhere close to as much of these guys as we do the pangolins, so we don't know their entire life story, but they've got these little horns or crests crests coming off of them, which look like they are actually made of bone. Some of them have beards, which would presumably be the males of the species. Some of them don't have beards, which would be presumably the females. Honestly, these sort of look like a bipedal take on wildebeest to me, just a little bit. In the same scene, we also see a bunch of little raptor guys running around. At first, I thought these were a proper, like, bird wyvern species, but we see them later along, running alongside the pangolins, and they look absolutely tiny. So I'm now on the theory that they are actually a type of endemic life, an entirely non-violent creature type, just because they are so damn small. The exception to that, the only other real option is maybe they could be a swarm-style fighter, and they just group up in like 10 or 20 of them and just do hit-and-run style tactics against a hunter, but I think that endemic life is much more probable for these. In the background of this, we also see a winged drake floating along, and comparing the shape of the distant figure of the winged drake to the shape of the player mount when it flies, I think it is very confirmable that this is a different species. It's a bit hard to make out if it is a returning winged drake or a new one from the singular image, but it's definitely differently shaped than the mount. The next monster that we see then is, of course, the player's mount. As colorful as hell as it is, it's just a lovely little raptor fellow who theoretically will be able to be customized and actually match our aesthetic wants personally. But it is, of course, also worth noting that this is a new monster species in itself. We never see another one of them in the trailer, so it's entirely possible the entire species is docile and willing to bond with hunters in this way, but it's also entirely possible that this is just a baby of the species, or maybe a singular member that we have bonded with personally, so it's entirely possible that this species of monster will be a fightable enemy within the game in different ways. So let's talk about its actual abilities that we see. It starts by running on hind legs like a normal raptor type monster, then you can see it sprint later in the trailer running on all fours, almost like a fanged wyvern. Then eventually we get a scene of it fully airborne, flying, gliding, whatever you want to actually call it. We only got a glimpse of it so far, but this monster does take to the air in some manner. Then we have our next new monster, and these are the crazy chunky bear type dudes. I don't even know how to really describe them. To me, they almost look like bears crossed with baboons, wombats, lions. It can be any combination of these, but then if you pause, you get really close in on their face that it's basically indistinguishable. It is so hard to make out the features of its face just because of the coloring of it. I cannot for the life of me work out what this creature is truly supposed to look like. Hell, it almost looks more like a dog face than anything. But the point of this is that the general shape of it, the full coverage of fur that it has, and the sandy coloring of it. Then they also show these bear creatures attacking, and what they do is classic fanged beast animations. I've seen people say that these are carbon copies of Gossarag animations, but I sort of disagree, and that yes, they are Gossarag animations, but they are also ones that Arzuros has, which means that they are more generic Fanged Beast animations in general. It's a more standard type of thing, a standard claw swipe, rather than only being something that Gossarag would do. The special thing that it does to me, the only attack that I've seen it do here, which I don't recognize from another Fanged Beast, is when this bear does a sort of forward lunging bite where it turns its face sideways to do it. That is a straight up new attack animation for a bear style Fanged Beast, where the head turns sideways. He opens his mouth the full way, revealing a terrifying set of massive teeth, and lunges forward. This is a unique animation for this kind of monster, which leads me to believe this one has more of a specific focus on its mouth, its teeth, its jaw that lines up because it looks massive, almost like that of, well, you know, a lion, which brings me down the trail that I sort of think these are supposed to be a mix between a bear and a lion, with the tail being a good example of that as well. The next question here is whether these are small monsters or large monsters, because if we saw only one of them, the answer would almost immediately be large monster without question. After all, it is a large monster shape, it has familiar large monster attack animations, so it would make sense, but then it also is traveling in a pack of like 4, which large monsters have literally never done in the series before. Size-wise, they're definitely bigger than the pangolins, but not so much bigger that it is a staggering difference and impossible for them to be small. And that leaves us in an interesting middle ground. I will say though, the more that I look at them and the way that they move, they more seem like a low-tier large monster, like almost an Arzuros type thing, so maybe the idea is that weaker large monsters in Monster Hunter 6 can now travel in packs for protection, due to simply not being as strong as bigger large monsters like Rathalos, for example, who would travel by itself. Or it could be entirely the opposite, where these bear things are small monsters, and our parameters for what counts as large and small monsters are about to be thrown out of the window with this new generation of monster hunting, which is something that I would totally believe. Then the final monster that shows up is of course Rathalos himself, flying over the title screen. One thing that I want to say here is that he looks absolutely massive compared to the other small monsters that we can see on the screen here. Like, the scale of everything is really put into perspective only when you see the Rathalos flying over it all. All that said, those are the 8 new and returning creatures we see actually confirmed in this trailer. To list them, it's the pangolin dudes, the birds that hang out on the pangolins' backs, the Kestodon looking bipedal bone-horned guys, the tiny little rabbit raptors that are either endemic life or small monsters, the winged drake that's in the background, the shot that definitely isn't the same species as our mount, but is a bit hard to quantify this distance, then the bear-lion hybrids that chase the hunter, our hunter's own mount monster itself, and then of course we have the Rathalos that shows up at the end. So let's talk about what we can extrapolate from this, what we can expect to see because of what we've seen so far. Well, this map itself, as the only thing that we've seen, is a giant desert, and notably, lightning storms are an active part of this environment, and with the way the map itself has sort of lightning rods, but even more importantly, the way that some of these creatures have evolved in a manner to defend themselves from lightning, possibly even using the fact that they can attract lightning to scare off more threatening predators from attacking them, which means that these lightning storms in this area are very vicious and very frequent, and have been for hundreds, thousands, probably even more than that number of years within this map in this area, which makes it even more likely these storms will have a lot to do with the story of the game itself, and I think it's entirely possible that either the flagship monster or the proper end boss Elder Dragon even will be in some way responsible for these storms. So that is my theory as far as that goes. As far as returning monsters in general then, one big one I think will come back here is Monoblos. It's been far too long, and this desert looks like an awesome opportunity to actually have him here. They could even have his singular horn act almost as a lightning rod type of thing. That would be very cool. Then we have the bear-shaped dudes, which to me implies more bears are going to be likely. Capcom is always good about using the same skeleton multiple times so as not to waste it at all, and then the sheer size of the areas that you can fight in does give me big siege monster vibes. Like, these areas look genuinely big enough for something like a Lao Shen Lung to just wander through unobstructed normally, which is crazy to say, but I think it's true. And while we have no evidence of that in the trailer itself, it feels likely to me that we are going to see an entire shift on the concept of siege monsters and the formula around that, just because of the sheer size of these maps and the way that it would let us fight massive monsters in an actual proper setting, especially if we have a mount that can fly, or even if it can just glide still. That means you could actually traverse and get on top of these larger creatures, and again, I think that would be awesome. On a similar note, I want to make a poll for my good friend duramboros. He would be awesome in zones of this size, especially a forest one if there happens to be one of those in this game, and more relevant to this specific map that we see here, I could totally see Russ duramboros fitting perfectly, being absolutely at home here. Dreams aside, I do want to round back to something that I said in my last video about this too. This game, to me, these maps, the monsters, the hunter, the mount, the equipment, it all really gives me a sort of African vibe and aesthetic in the same way that Monster Hunter World was supposed to be the Americas, Rise was Japan, Sunbreak was the United Kingdom. This looks inspired by Africa to me. And to really drive that home, the first monster that we see are based on pangolins, which are animals that only exist in Asia and Africa in the real world. Then we see a familiar bipedal type of monster, but a bit more wildebeest looking. Then we see what my best description so far is a bear crossed with a lion. And if I'm right, obviously a lion would fit that theory too. So the way that I see it, it's entirely possible that this is a purposeful thematic decision, and so maybe any returning monsters they bring in would be intended to fit in that way, or even maybe we can make some slight predictions about some sort of animals that are in real life that could be the basis of new monsters because of the region. Perhaps we'll have something based off of a hippo or a vulture or a hyena, you know, that type of thing. Just classic animals that fit the actual locale that we are based in. And then we have one more major point to talk about here, which is the title of the game itself, and more specifically the logo for the game. Monster Hunter game logos tend to mean a hell of a lot. Oftentimes their logo are sort of hiding, just sort of representing elder dragons or even final bosses unique to that game. This logo for Monster Hunter Wilds clearly has two large serpents intertwined, and that leads to the obvious conclusion that there will be at least one extremely important snake wyvern in this game, meaning the return of snakes in general, and the likely return of something like Najarala as a minor snake wyvern if the skeleton is returning anyways. So that's another pretty easy called shot to actually make. All in all, there's just so much going on in this, considering it is just an announcement trailer. It's just over a minute of footage, not much in the grand scheme of things, but it actually has so much to tell us, so much that we can learn from it. What do you think then? Do you like the new monsters that we are shown, and what monsters do you think we can expect to return based on what we've seen so far? Do you think it is sticking to a geographical type of theme like I do, or how much of an impact do you think that will have on the monsters within the game if it does? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.